When most people picture the Old Testament system of worship, they do not usually picture warmth. We imagine cold stone and sharp bronze. We picture burning altars, thick smoke, and rivers of blood. We think of a terrifyingly holy God on one side, a trembling priest on the other, and a massive, heavy veil keeping everyone else out. We assume the ancient tabernacle was a place of sterile mechanics, where a few chosen men performed dangerous, rigid rituals just to keep God from striking the camp down. At first glance, it feels like a system built entirely on distance and fear. But that image misses the heart of what was actually happening in the wilderness. Right in the center of the holiest and most terrifying place in the ancient world, God commanded the creation of something beautiful. Not just beautiful, deeply, surprisingly intimate. In the book of Exodus, God gives Moses the detailed blueprints for the tabernacle. For chapters, the text reads like an architect's manual. It lists the exact dimensions for wooden frames, the loops for the heavy curtains, and the measurements for the golden furniture. It sounds structural. It feels vast and unapproachable. But in Exodus chapter 28, the camera of the text suddenly shifts. It moves away from the architecture of the tent and zooms in on the man who will serve inside it. God tells Moses to make sacred garments for his brother, Aaron, the high priest. The text says these garments are meant to give him dignity and honor. And immediately, the instructions change from wood and metal to fine linen, woven with gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. When the high priest stepped into the holy place, he was entirely alone. The rest of the nation was outside, separated by layers of fabric and strict boundaries. It was a heavy, quiet isolation. And yet, because of one specific garment, he was not really alone at all. Among the intricate robes, tunics, and sashes, there is one piece that stands out above the rest. It is called the Breastpiece of Judgment. To modern ears, that name sounds incredibly severe. A breastpiece of judgment sounds like a tool of condemnation. It sounds like something a supreme judge wears when he is about to hand down a final, guilty verdict against a broken people. It sounds like a symbol of divine anger. But the biblical text is doing something much deeper. This object was not designed to punish the people. It was designed to carry them. The breastpiece was not just a piece of elaborate ancient clothing. It was a physical theology. It was a living, moving picture of what it means to mediate between heaven and earth. God was using fabric, thread, and physical weight to teach Israel what intercession actually feels like. He was showing them that the true priest does not just perform duties for the people, he bears them. The breastpiece ensured that when he stood in the quiet presence of God, the entire nation stood there with him. This single piece of clothing begins to reveal a profound truth about how God views his people, centuries before the final high priest would ever walk the earth. But to understand what this object was actually doing, we first have to look at the architecture of the man who was wearing it. To understand the breastpiece, we first have to understand the canvas it rested on. In the ancient world, clothing was never just fabric. Clothing was identity. It communicated status, authority, and role. But the garments of the biblical high priest were doing something even more profound. When Aaron, the first high priest, prepared to enter the presence of God, he did not just wear sacred clothing. He wore the tabernacle itself. If you read through the early chapters of Exodus, you find the exact materials God required to build the interior of the sacred tent. He asked for fine twined linen. He asked for blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. He asked for pure gold. These were the colors and textures of the holy place. They made up the heavy veil. They made up the interior curtains. Then, in Exodus chapter 28, God commands Moses to make the garments for the high priest. Listen to the materials he requires: gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine twined linen. The exact same materials, the exact same colors. The high priest was entirely wrapped in the architecture of the sanctuary. He was a walking, living, breathing piece of the holy tent. Where he walked, the sanctuary walked. This is because the high priest was the human embodiment of the meeting space between heaven and earth. He stood in the gap. On one side was a perfectly holy God. On the other side was a fractured, wandering, often rebellious nation. The high priest had to represent both. The fine linen and the gold reflected the glory and perfection of God's dwelling place. And the foundation of this living sanctuary was a garment called the ephod. The ephod was an intricately woven piece of clothing. It fit somewhat like a heavy, elaborate apron or a structured vest, worn over a solid blue robe. It was the most distinct piece of the priestly uniform, bound around the waist with a beautifully woven waistband. But the ephod was not designed to simply look impressive. It was designed as a mounting structure. It was built to hold something else. God commanded Moses to make golden rings and attach them to the ephod. Then, he was to make corresponding golden rings and attach them to the breastpiece. Finally, they were to be tied together with a secure blue cord. The instructions in Exodus are highly specific about this attachment. The text says it must be tied securely so that the breastpiece will not tear loose from the ephod. It was not a necklace. It was not a pendant that could swing freely or fall off when the priest leaned over the altar. It was tightly, permanently bound to the priest. It moved exactly when he moved. It rested exactly where he rested. When we read ancient blueprints like this, it is easy to get lost in the gold rings and the blue cords. It is easy to see nothing but ancient tailoring. But every detail in the biblical text is doing theological work. God was ensuring that the breastpiece could never be separated from the priest. It was not an optional accessory. It was the very center of his calling. The high priest could not perform his duties without it. He could not enter the holy place and leave this piece behind. The fabric of the ephod was stunning. The woven gold was heavy. The blue, purple, and scarlet yarn flashed in the dim light of the golden lampstand. But of all the intricate garments Aaron wore, the piece that sat at the very center of his chest was fundamentally different from the rest. It was designed to carry something incredibly heavy, and it was not made of fabric. The ephod was the heavy, golden foundation, but the breastpiece was the focal point. According to Exodus chapter 28, the breastpiece was made of the exact same material as the ephod. It was woven with gold thread, along with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen, but it was shaped differently. It was folded double, creating a square pouch. It was 1 span long and 1 span wide. That is roughly 9 inches by 9 inches. It was a small square of fabric, but what was placed on the front of it made it the most valuable object the priest wore. God commanded Moses to take 12 precious stones and mount them on the outside of the pouch. They were to be arranged in 4 distinct rows, with 3 stones in each row. And every single stone had to be securely fastened in a delicate housing of pure gold. The biblical text lists the stones row by row. The first row was a ruby, a topaz, and an emerald. The second row was a turquoise, a sapphire, and a diamond. The third row was a jacinth, an agate, and an amethyst. The fourth row was a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. Scholars and translators sometimes debate the exact modern equivalents of these ancient Hebrew gem names. Ancient gemology categorized stones differently than we do today, often organizing them by color and hardness rather than precise chemical composition. But the exact scientific identity of the rocks is not the primary point. The point is the variety, and the point is the value. God did not tell Moses to mount 12 identical blocks of silver. He did not ask for 12 identical diamonds. He asked for a spectrum. He asked for different colors, different densities, and different ways of catching and reflecting the light. Why? Because these 12 stones were not just decorations. They represented the 12 tribes of Israel. And the 12 tribes of Israel were not identical. They were incredibly different. Some tribes were massive and influential. Others were small and easily overlooked. They had different temperaments, different roles, and very different histories. Think about the actual sons of Jacob, the men these tribes were named after. Reuben was unstable. Simeon and Levi had a history of reckless violence. Judah had a deeply flawed past, yet he was chosen to carry the royal line. Benjamin was the fiercely protected youngest brother. They were a difficult, complicated, and often rebellious family. As a nation in the wilderness, they complained, they doubted, and they fractured. But look at how God chooses to represent them in the holy place. On the chest of the high priest, they are not presented as a burden to be discarded. They are presented as treasure. They are precious stones, carefully arranged and permanently locked into settings of pure gold. The high priest did not get to choose which stones he carried. He could not look at the history of the tribes and decide that Reuben was too unstable to bring into the sanctuary. He could not decide that Simeon was too violent to carry into the presence of God. He did not just carry the faithful tribes. He carried the entirety of the covenant people. The priesthood was not built on the perfection of the people, it was built on the grace of representation. The priest bore the whole weight of the whole family, the beautiful and the broken, the strong and the weak. When he stood before the golden lampstand in the holy place, the light hit all 12 stones. That alone is a stunning picture of grace. But God did not just want a collection of colorful gems. He wanted something far more specific. He wanted permanent identity. God wanted 12 different stones. But it was not just the material of the stones that mattered. It was what was violently carved into them. The stones themselves were stunning. But an unmarked stone in the ancient world, no matter how precious, is just an object of wealth. It holds value, but it does not tell a story. God did not just want valuable items sparkling in the holy place. He wanted a permanent record of his people. Exodus chapter 28, verse 21, gives a very specific instruction for the craftsman. It says there are to be 12 stones, one for each of the names of the sons of Israel, and they must be engraved like a signet, each with the name of one of the 12 tribes. Notice the method. God did not tell the craftsman to paint the names onto the gems. He did not tell them to write the names with ink. Ink can be washed away. Paint chips off over time. If a name is merely painted onto a surface, it can be easily erased if the person wearing it decides they no longer want to carry it. But engraving is entirely different. Engraving requires friction. It requires sharp instruments and heavy pressure. It requires the permanent removal of material. Once a name is cut deep into the face of a hard stone, it cannot be undone. You cannot wipe it clean. The stone is forever changed to hold that specific word. This is a massive theological statement about the grace of God. Think about the people whose names were being violently carved into those stones. The children of Israel in the wilderness were incredibly fickle. Their loyalties changed by the day. One moment they were singing songs of deliverance on the shores of the Red Sea, praising God for their freedom. A few weeks later, they were complaining about the food and begging to go back to slavery in Egypt. Their faith was unstable. Their obedience was fragile. They were a mass of shifting emotions, fears, and failures. If their standing before God depended on their daily consistency, their names would have been wiped from the sanctuary almost immediately. But God did not write their names in the shifting sand of the desert. He had them carved into stone. When the high priest walked into the holy place, he did not carry a temporary record. He did not carry a list that was constantly being revised, erased, and rewritten based on the daily performance of the camp. He carried an engraved, unchangeable memory. And the text gives us another profound detail about this engraving. It says they must be carved specifically like a signet. In the ancient Near East, a signet ring or a cylinder seal was the absolute mark of a king's authority. When a king pressed his signet into warm wax or clay, it meant the document was final. It was his personal signature. It represented ownership, royal authority, and unbroken promises. A decree sealed with a signet could not be reversed. By instructing the craftsman to engrave the names of the tribes like a signet, God was saying something beautiful about how he viewed this broken, wandering nation. They were his. They were his treasured possession, marked with his authoritative seal, even when they felt completely unworthy in the camp outside. Their names were permanently locked in gold and deeply cut into stone in the quiet presence of God. The high priest acted as a living, moving memorial of the covenant. So the stones are precious, and the names are permanent. But the most important detail of this entire garment is not the material, and it is not the engraving. It is exactly where those names were placed. We have seen the heavy golden thread. We have seen the 12 distinct stones. We have seen the permanent engraving of the names. But an object's meaning is entirely dependent on where it is placed. If God had told the high priest to carry these stones in a wooden box, it would mean one thing. If he had told him to carry them in his hands, it would mean another. But God was incredibly specific about the anatomy of the priest's garments. In Exodus chapter 28, verse 29, the command reaches its emotional center. The text says, "Whenever Aaron enters the holy place, he will bear the names of the sons of Israel over his heart, on the breastpiece of decision as a continuing memorial before the Lord." Over his heart. That detail is not just poetic, it is deeply theological. There were actually two places the high priest carried the names of the tribes. Earlier in the chapter, God instructed Moses to take 2 large onyx stones, engrave 6 names on one and 6 names on the other, and attach them to the shoulder pieces of the ephod. The shoulders are the place of strength. They are the place of labor. The priest carried the burden of the people on his shoulders. But God did not stop there. The shoulders are for carrying weight. The heart is for carrying affection. In ancient Hebrew thought, the heart was not merely the center of emotion. It was the center of the human will. It was the seat of intellect, decision, and the deepest loyalties of a person. To place something over the heart was to say, "This is what I am focused on. This is what I love. This is what drives my decisions." By commanding the priest to wear the breastpiece over his heart, God was defining the nature of true intercession. A priest cannot be indifferent to the people he represents. He cannot merely perform a cold religious transaction. He cannot simply walk into the holy place, go through the mechanical motions of burning incense and trimming lamps, and then leave. Intercession requires affection. When Aaron stood in the quiet sanctuary, the 12 engraved stones rested directly against his chest. As he breathed, the stones moved. With every beat of his heart, the names of the tribes were pressed against him. He felt their weight. He felt their presence. This meant that in the eyes of God, the priest and the people were inseparable. God did not just look at the high priest performing a solitary ritual. He looked at the priest's chest and saw the entire nation held closely. It is a stunning picture of grace. The people outside the tent might have been afraid of the holy place. They might have felt distant from the presence of God. They knew their own failures. They knew they could not survive walking behind the heavy veil. But inside the tent, their names were resting on the heartbeat of the man who stood before God on their behalf. That is what a priest does. He brings the heart of God to the people, and he brings the names of the people to the heart of God. It is a beautiful, deeply comforting image of mediation. But the garment had a specific, slightly intimidating title. It was not primarily called the breastpiece of memory. It was not called the breastpiece of affection. It was called the breastpiece of judgment. And that title reveals a completely different layer of what the priest was doing in the dark tent and what was hidden perfectly inside the pouch. In English, the word judgment almost always carries a heavy, negative weight. We hear the word and we instinctively picture a courtroom. We picture a judge handing down a final sentence. We picture consequence, anger, and condemnation. So when Exodus chapter 28 introduces the breastpiece of judgment, it sounds slightly terrifying. It sounds like the high priest is carrying a heavy list of the people's sins, walking into the holy place to await their punishment. But that is not what the Hebrew text is doing. The word translated as judgment is mishpat. It can mean a legal verdict, but its root is much wider. It means a decision. It means clarity. It means establishing what is right and restoring order when things are confused. And the physical design of the breastpiece tells us exactly how this clarity was meant to be found. Earlier, we saw that the breastpiece was woven with gold thread and folded double, creating a small, square pouch. God did not just want a flat piece of fabric to hold the 12 stones on the outside. He wanted a pocket. And in verse 30 of the same chapter, we find out why. God tells Moses to put the Urim and the Thummim inside the breastpiece of judgment. For centuries, scholars, rabbis, and historians have debated exactly what these two ancient objects were. The biblical text itself does not describe their physical shape. It does not tell us what material they were made from. Most scholars believe they were two distinct stones, or perhaps a set of sacred lots, kept perfectly hidden inside the folds of the priest's garment. But while we do not know exactly what they looked like, the language gives us a profound clue about what they meant. In Hebrew, Urim is closely connected to the word for light. Thummim is connected to the word for perfection or completion, lights and perfections. When the nation of Israel was standing at a crossroads in the wilderness, when they faced a terrifying enemy, or when a tribal dispute threatened to fracture the camp, human wisdom was not enough. The leaders of the nation did not just guess. They did not just debate. They went to the high priest. The high priest would stand before the Lord, wearing the heavy ephod, with the 12 names of the tribes resting over his heart, and he would use the Urim and Thummim to receive a clear, perfect decision from God. We do not know the exact mechanics of how this worked. Some ancient Jewish traditions suggest the stones would catch the light of the golden lampstand in a specific way to reveal an answer. Other traditions believe they were pulled out of the pouch like drawing lots, giving a clear yes or no from God. The biblical text does not explain the method, it only explains the meaning. The breastpiece of judgment was actually the breastpiece of decision. It was the place where the perfect light of God met the complicated, confusing reality of human life. When you look at the whole garment together, a breathtaking picture begins to form. On the outside of the pouch, the priest carried the engraved names of the people. On the inside of the pouch, resting directly against his chest, he carried the means of hearing God's voice. He held the questions of the people, and he held the answers of God at the exact same time. This means the high priest was not going into the holy place to condemn the nation. He was going in to find a path forward for them. Judgment here does not mean condemnation. It means clarity. It means light in the darkness. And that changes how we understand the heavy burden the priest was carrying. When you step back and look at the entire design of the high priest, a breathtaking theology of mediation appears. He is wrapped in the colors of the tabernacle. He is bound tightly by the golden ephod. On his shoulders, he carries the heavy labor of the nation. On his chest, over his heart, he carries 12 distinct precious stones, permanently engraved with the names of a broken, wandering people. And hidden inside that very same pouch, resting against his skin, he carries the perfect light and clarity of God. Exodus chapter 28, verse 30, summarizes the entire purpose of this garment in one sentence. It says, "Thus Aaron will always bear the means of making decisions for the Israelites over his heart before the Lord." Listen to the language of that command. He will always bear. The Hebrew word used here carries the sense of lifting up, of sustaining, of carrying a real and heavy load. Intercession is not passive. It is an act of spiritual and emotional endurance. When the high priest walked into the holy place, he did not just bring an empty request to God. He brought the people themselves. He could not seek God's direction for the camp without physically feeling the weight of the camp on his chest. He could not ask for the perfect light of God's wisdom without simultaneously pressing the names of the tribes against his own heart. This is what it means to stand in the gap. A true mediator cannot be detached. If he is detached from God, he has no light to offer the people. But if he is detached from the people, he has no one to offer the light to. He has to hold both. He has to carry the brokenness of the nation and the perfection of God at the exact same time. And that is a profound, exhausting burden. Imagine what it felt like to be Aaron. He knew the people whose names he was wearing. He heard their complaints. He saw their rebellion. He knew his own failures. He knew that the only reason he was allowed to stand in the quiet light of the sanctuary was because of the blood of the sacrifices offered at the bronze altar outside. Yet, because of the breastpiece, he was commanded to carry this difficult family into the holiest space on earth, presenting them to God not as a frustrating problem, but as an engraved treasure. It is one of the most beautiful pictures of grace in the entire Old Testament. But the biblical narrative does not stop there. As beautiful as this picture was, it contained a structural weakness. The stones were permanent. The gold was pure. The engraving could not be erased. But the man wearing the garment was temporary. Aaron was human. He was going to grow old. His heart was going to stop beating. Eventually, the sacred garments would have to be stripped off his body and placed onto the shoulders of his son. And for centuries, this is exactly what happened. Generation after generation, a new high priest would put on the golden ephod. He would tie the breastpiece over his chest. He would walk behind the heavy veil. But eventually, every earthly high priest died. The nation needed a mediator whose priesthood was not interrupted by death. They needed someone who could carry their names perfectly, without failing. For centuries, this beautifully woven garment was how the people of God were remembered in the holy place. But this ancient, physical picture was only a shadow. It was always preparing the world to recognize a final priest. For centuries, the breastpiece of judgment was the ultimate symbol of intercession. It was carefully preserved and passed down from priest to priest. But in the New Testament, the book of Hebrews makes a stunning claim. It says that the entire tabernacle, the golden ephod, and the 12 precious stones were never the final reality. They were a shadow. They were a physical, temporary rehearsal for something eternal. Hebrews chapter 4 and chapter 7 tell us that Jesus Christ is the final great high priest. But his priesthood operates on an entirely different level than the men who served in the ancient wilderness. When Jesus walked the earth, he did not wear the official garments of the high priest. He did not wear blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. He did not wear a heavy golden ephod. When he was crucified, the soldiers stripped him of the simple tunic he owned. And when he ascended into heaven, he did not need to put on a woven pouch of 12 stones to remember his people. He did not need the physical breastpiece, because he is the reality that the breastpiece was pointing to all along. Think about the deep theology God built into that 9-inch square of fabric. Aaron carried the names of a broken, wandering people over his heart. He felt the physical weight of those stones against his chest, but he only did it symbolically. Jesus actually took the weight, the sin, and the brokenness of his people upon himself. Hebrews chapter 4 says that we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. He knows the heavy reality of the human condition. He does not just wear our names on his clothing. The prophet Isaiah says, God has engraved his people on the palms of his hands. Aaron carried the Urim and Thummim to find the light and perfection of God's will. He needed an external object to hear the voice of God. But Jesus does not need the Urim and Thummim. He is the light of the world. He is the perfect Word of God made flesh. Inside the person of Jesus, the perfect clarity of heaven and the deepest burdens of humanity are completely and permanently united. Aaron's intercession was interrupted by his own death. Eventually, he had to take the breastpiece off. But Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25 says that Jesus is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. He never takes the garment off. His intercession has no end. When we look back at Exodus chapter 28, the ancient blueprints suddenly look entirely different. God was not just giving an artisan instructions for making beautiful jewelry. He was revealing his own character. He was showing Israel that he is not a God who manages his people from a cold, sterile distance. He is a God who draws them near. He requires their names to be carried in the holy place. If you are in Christ, your standing before God does not depend on your own perfection. It does not depend on your ability to survive the terrifying holiness of God on your own strength. It depends entirely on the high priest who stands there for you. Like the 12 tribes in the wilderness, your faith might be fragile. Your obedience might falter. You might feel entirely unworthy to enter the sanctuary. But your name is not written in shifting sand. You are carried into the presence of God by a priest who cannot fail, whose life cannot end, and whose intercession never stops. He bears your name over his heart as a permanent memorial before the Father. If this journey through Scripture has helped you see the Bible with fresh eyes, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next deep dive. The breastpiece of judgment was never just an elaborate piece of ancient clothing. It was the quiet architecture of grace. It was a physical promise, woven in gold and stone, preparing the world for a priest who would carry his people forever.